And these white rhino bulls will set up these middens. They will come and they will defecate in these middens, and then they will kick it up and they will break the dung. Good morning everyone, welcome back to another beautiful day on Shamwari Private Game Reserve, another great episode of Shamwari TV. So we've done a few episodes previously looking at communication of animals, and we've done some interesting things like elephants and lions. There's one other interesting animal that I want to show you today that has some really interesting communication, and that's these guys over here, rhinos. So this is a white rhino, and we've on many episodes before shown you white rhinos and how they interact with one another, but what we haven't really looked at is a little bit more in depth at their communication and just how sophisticated it is. Now these guys have got really poor eyesight. If you have a look from here, their eyes are really low down and they're really tiny. And if you think about this guy, these animals are so big, they're so huge, and their food is grass. The white rhino anyway, so they don't need really good eyesight, but to compensate for that they've got phenomenal hearing and even better sense of smell. So let's have a look how sense of smell plays a part in communication for these guys. Now this is something that we call a rhino midden, and it's probably one of the most well-explained things that field guides generally show and introduce guests to out on game drive. But there's so much behavioral information that is in these rhino middens, information that can be gained not only for us to interpret what's going on around. The rhinos are utilizing this midden as a major source of information and communication. And let's see if we can decipher a little bit of it. So when we look at white rhino and we look at these middens, your white rhinos tend to be really sociable animals. There will sometimes be large aggregations of them, and historically there were massive densities of white rhinos found all throughout southern Africa. And these middens is where they would have communicated in a very sophisticated manner. And how they utilize the midden would allow us to even identify, is it a male, is it a female, is it a sub-adult, is it a submissive, any of that type of information, because at the end of the day, this is number one, a territorial marker for the bulls. A big territorial white rhino will utilize these middens and sometimes have maybe 30 of them within his territory, and he'll go marking from one midden to the next, obviously to demarcate a boundary all the way around his territory, to tell all the other territorial males that border him that he's there, he's still active, that's his territory. And obviously he's going to be looking at areas with the best grazing and the best access to water. That's the most highly contended ground, because then your females will be there to access food and water. And if the females are there, the mating rights are there. So the better the piece of land, the higher the competition. And these white rhino bulls will set up these middens. They will come and they will defecate in these middens, and then they will kick it up and they will break the dung and spread it over a wide area. So not only visually do you have this much wider area of dung that's now created, but the fact that that rhino is busy kicking it, the dung particles and the scent particles will get entrapped in his feet, and when he walks along the perimeter of his territory all the way to the next midden, so you'll get the transfer of scent, and basically like a chemical wall, an olfactory wall that allows all other rhinos crossing to know that there's a territorial male here. Now these middens are not only utilized by the territorial bulls. Any other white rhino that moves into this territory will utilize this midden, but there's certain etiquette that they have to follow. If it's a female like this over here, it's big bolus balls of dung, and we can see it's white rhino because of the grass composition. It's purely made up of grass, and there's a very dark color to it as well when it's fresh. But this dung is unbroken, it's unkicked, and that means your females come and defecate here, and they will do that for communication. They will come to the midden, they will sniff around, see what other females have been in the area potentially, what other males, and then obviously leave their dung behind, but unkicked. And the youngsters will utilize it as well, particularly if there's a youngster with a female. Now, what's the importance of a female utilizing this midden? Well, obviously it's for communication within these social animals. And the fact that the female comes and defecates here, when the male comes here, he will be able to smell this dung and pick up chemical pheromones from the dung, the reproductive status, the health, the age of the female. And if she's ready to mate, if she's going into estrus, and that bull using his nose will be able to trail that female and find her and obviously try and herd her into the territory and keep her there for as long as possible so that he will have mating rights with her. And very interesting, in most areas where you find white rhino and black rhino, you'll find shared middens. And here's evidence of black rhino dung within this white rhino midden. We'll see if we can find a fresher example. So this is such a typical and really good example of a clear white rhino midden, and just so typical because of where it is. And if we look over here, we can see a really big accumulation of kicked up and almost piled up high against the side of the bush of white rhino midden dung. Further out on the outskirts, very fresh female white rhino or a submissive bull. You can see this really fresh dung, all the flies just starting to come here, still nice, and it's cold, so it's not that fresh, but fresh enough that you can see still wet on the inside there. A lot of smell coming off of this. But on major roads and game trails, this is where your white rhino will leave these middens, because it's a billboard, it's communication. And they need to do this where the message will be communicated. So for an animal to go and do it out of the way in the bushes or away from where traffic is going to be, the message isn't going to be communicated. And that's the point of all this territorial communication. It's for messages to be communicated. And this is a super interesting setup that's happened over here. This white rhino midden has been in use for a really long time. It's, I would say, about 80 centimeters, nearly a meter high on the side of that bush over there as it's piled up in depth. So just long-term continuous use, getting defecated, and there's almost a bowl that has been formed as the white rhino bull has been kicking backwards and spreading the dung into the bushes. And then from there he will walk on the perimeter, and you can see the big game trail over there. He would walk off over there and that scent will get taken with him. But something interesting that's happened over here is, if we grab that and we open that up, and we can see these two fresh scrapes over here, that's black rhino dung. And we can tell that that is black rhino dung because if we open it up, the composition of the dung is more leaves and twigs. And if we have a look at the twigs that we pull out of the dung, they've got a 45-degree angle cut on them. And that is so typical of what we find with black rhino, is these very nice, neat, nipped off 45-degree angle twigs and branches within the dung. And that is from a black rhino that has utilized this white rhino midden, and it's a very common thing. Especially here at Shamwari, we probably won't find a rhino midden that isn't both black and white rhinos utilizing the same midden. They're not in competition with one another. They are not utilizing the same resources other than water, but their space is different, their food is different, and therefore their competition is different. But they will utilize the same middens because it's a big billboard and it just helps with the communication. So we've looked at rhinos in terms of their three main senses. Their sense of smell is obviously phenomenal, and they get so much information, and so much social information is gathered through their olfactory communication, their sense of smell. Their sense of hearing is obviously very good, and that they'll use mainly for safety. So as I'm talking now, I can see that rhino's ears are focused back onto me, but permanently those ears are busy moving, trying to pick up any sounds that could potentially be a threat or a predator that they would need to be on the listen for. So another form of communication that rhinos often do is vocal communication. Now, not in the sense that they do it all the time, but when a bull will meet a female or a group of females and there's potential that the female is in estrus, there'll be a lot of grunting and snorting and even some bellowing that the male will employ on the female. They all mean different things. Some of it will try and be coaxing or begging the female to stay within his territory. Definitely a little bit of frustration at times. There could even be snorting and roaring when bulls get together, and it escalates past a bull being submissive to a territorial bull, and neither one of them want to back down. I think one of the best sounds for me in nature, though, is when a young rhino calf wants to suckle from the mother. You'll be sitting out in the bush and you hear this, it almost sounds like a whale or a dolphin, and that's a young little white rhino calf that's busy begging and whining for the mother, that she'll get into a position where he's able to suckle off of the mother. So something like visual communication is used, although they need to be quite close to one another before it'll be effective. So things like head posture, position of ears, even curling up of the tail can signify certain messages. So generally we sit in a situation where rhinos don't have natural predators. Youngsters can be susceptible to lions at times, but in this environment you can see we've got elephants, we've got rhinos, everyone's just doing their thing, and because they're not utilizing necessarily the exact same food source, there's a lack of competition and everyone's just fine to be in each other's presence. If a rhino is feeling threatened, the ears go back, the head gets lowered, and then the rhino can actually charge, and there can be quite loud vocal communication, almost roaring or bellowing as that rhino charges towards its perceived threat, and that's generally enough to chase whatever predator it is away. And it is unfortunate that humans are at the top of the list of predators for rhinos. Maybe about 1 kilometer away from us, there's a group of 3 black rhino that have come out of the bushline, slowly feeding their way down to another pan system down over here. So we'll see if we can approach them as well. So that was absolutely incredible. We just had 3 black rhino come down to the water to drink. Absolutely action-packed morning. There's just been stuff happening all around us. It's been absolutely incredible, and I'm super glad you got to join us this morning. If you guys are not subscribed, make sure you hit that subscribe button soon. You will be notified of all the videos as we keep them coming to you. So join us again next time at Shamwari Private Game Reserve right here on Shamwari TV. Until then, stay safe.